Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Ellen Shiflett, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad. And I am just thrilled to welcome you this morning to our program, especially after 2 years of delays. We're here this morning for two reasons. First, to celebrate the founding of the North Carolina League of Women Voters on October 7th, 1920, in these very chambers in what was then the brand new Guilford County Courthouse. Secondly, we are here to celebrate Gertrude Weil, an extraordinary woman who spent her life transforming ideas into actions on the public stage. She was a woman with tremendous dedication and talent, and the North Carolina League is a fortunate beneficiary of her work. This morning, you will hear about Gertrude's life, her leadership in both the suffrage movement and in the establishment of the North Carolina League. You will learn about the significance of this building that was the setting for this historic event and what happened here on that day so long ago. And you will learn about the legacy of the North Carolina League of Women Voters and what was given to LWPT, which is our local league. And you'll hear about the legacy that we're still upholding 102 years later. When Gertrude issued the call for a meeting in Greensboro on October 7th, 1920, she invited members of all of the women's organizations active in the state at the time. As testimony to Miss Wheel's visionary influence, I would like to read a letter that we received we didn't receive anything in 1921, in 2021, from the National Women's Christian Temperance Union. It's the headquarters in Evanston, Illinois. Greetings, distinguished leaders and special guests and celebrants. The National Women's Christian Temperance Union, the oldest continuing women's organization in the world, is honored to offer warmest congratulations to the North Carolina League of Women Voters on their centennial and to Guilford County, North Carolina, on the 250th anniversary of its founding. The Women's Christian Temperance Union of North Carolina is noted as one of the first organizations on record supporting the suffrage movement in 1920. Although no state WCTU presently exists in North Carolina, the national organization joins you in commemorating the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. The National Women's Christian Temperance Union unites with you in gratitude for those visionaries who knew voting rights for women would mean an opportunity to effect orderly change. We join you in paying homage to those women who believed economic and social problems must be addressed, not ignored. Gertrude Weil, a citizen activist being honored today, said, "Justice, mercy, and goodness are not to be held in a vacuum, but practiced in our daily lives." This celebration is a testament to the fact that those were not idle words. Many celebrants here today are success stories directly attributed to yesterday's movers and shakers who dedicated themselves to molding, educating future generations. Celebrating the past leads to the thoughts and plans for the future. Let it be known to all gathered here that the National Women's Christian Temperance Union aspires to partner with you that together we may be positive change agents in the 21st century. Best wishes, Kathleen S. Johnson, Vice President for the NWCTU. Gertrude's role was so essential that even today, the League of Women Voters of North Carolina presents the Gertrude Weil Award at its biennial convention to recognize the League member whose work and sacrifice most represents the work of Gertrude Weil. We are so fortunate to have her, not just as the founder of the League and a person whose life we can strive to emulate, but also as an early leader who established the important framework that has guided us for 102 years, and hopefully will continue to guide us for many years to come. We hope that you will find the stories that you hear today as fascinating as we who have worked to prepare this program have found them. And we are delighted to be able to provide recognition and ongoing commemoration of Ms. Weil's lasting contributions through the dedication of both a monument and a marker to her at the conclusion of this program this morning. At this point, let's begin. Joe Nicholas, President of the League of Women Voters of North Carolina, will bring greetings from the State League and will also bring greetings from Allison Riggs, a director of the League of the Women Voters US, who is unable to join us this morning.
Good morning. And you can obviously tell I was a principal and my voice is very loud, so I will step back a little bit. Yes, I'm Joe Nicholas, President of the League of Women Voters of North Carolina. What a grand celebration we have today, commemorating a monument to the founding person, Gertrude Weil, of the League of Women Voters of North Carolina, as well as dedicating a marker for the Pomeroy National Women's Suffrage Trail. You'll be hearing about many interesting facts of Gertrude Weil and the suffrage marker. If it wasn't for the boldness and the tenacity of Gertrude Weil, there would not have been a League of Women Voters of North Carolina established. One interesting fact that I've learned about her was this story of her bravery. Gertrude was spunky. During the 1922 election, she made headlines because she noticed a stack of illegally marked ballots. So she walked over to those ballots, picked them up, ripped them up, and threw them out of the polling place. What a leader. We have grown tremendously since that memorable day, thanks to Gertrude Weil. We are nearly 2,000 members strong statewide in North Carolina and growing. We are a nonpartisan organization that looks at all sides of an issue and educates all the people of North Carolina so they may make their decision about our democracy. Our purpose is to empower voters and defend our democracy. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I challenge you to make your voices heard and vote as if your life depended on it in the upcoming elections. We must forge ahead and not lose our democracy. Thank you. Now I get to speak on behalf of the League of Women Voters of the United States in the place of Allison Riggs, who is now a new board member for the League LWV US. And Allison is also our legal person for the League of Women Voters of North Carolina. On behalf of that, she wrote to me and said, North Carolina has long been at the foreground of the fight for voting rights, from fighting gerrymandering and voter suppression to fighting for electoral reforms that will make participating in the political process more accessible to all. I cannot imagine how we could have made all the progress we have made without the contributions of LWVNC since its founding. But we know the work is not done. LWVUS is grateful for the efforts of Gertrude Will to formalize and ensure that the League's presence was available to suffragettes and activists in the state struggling for a more representative democracy. And we're so grateful that this venerable institution continues to bend and move forward to justice with tireless work of its members and its partners. Congratulations. I thank you so much for participating today, as she said, in the celebration of a pioneering leader in LWV, North Carolina. I am sorry I could not be able to join you with all this in person. She is in court working for us. But on behalf of the LWVUS Board of Directors, I want to share our gratitude for you and the Gertrude Will in the building of the powerful movement in North Carolina. In so many ways, our democracy and our founding doctrines have been more aspirational than actual. It may take blood, sweat, and tears for so many of those who came before us, and it did, to make our democracy real for more people. And it will take even more time to make it real for all people. Today, we celebrate the contributions of Gertrude Will made to securing women's suffrage and to building the organization we all know and love, the League of Women Voters of North Carolina. Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce Calvina Foster. She is the Vice Chair of the Guilford County Board of Commissioners. She will represent the county this morning, and she will also recognize the public officials who are here with us from the City of Greensboro and Guilford County.
And as the Guilford County Board of Commissioners Vice Chair and Commissioner Representative for District 1, I would like to extend my warmest greetings to the attendees and honored guests of this dedication of a National Votes for Women trail marker and monument honoring Gertrude Will. I also bring greetings from the entire board of the County Commissioners, where Melvin Skip Austin does serve as chairman. So a little over 100 years ago, on October 7, 1920, following the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, Gertrude Will, North Carolina suffrage leader and president of the Equal Suffrage Association of North Carolina, called a meeting on these very grounds we are currently standing to establish the North Carolina League of Women Voters, an organization designed to help people to become more informed participants in government. While it would take another 51 years for our state to ratify the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, we know it was through the efforts of Gertrude Will and so many women like her that made the passage of that amendment possible on a national level. Now let's hope it doesn't take as long for our representatives in Raleigh to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. As an elected official and local legislator, I consider it a real honor to be able to welcome everyone at this dedication ceremony honoring Gertrude Will. I want to take a moment and encourage you to look to your neighbors in this room today. We have gathered to celebrate and remember those who have come before us to champion the causes of diversity and inclusion and equality, using the power of information and inclusion in our democratic process. I believe Gertrude would be extremely proud to see just how far we have progressed the last century. I'm excited to think about how much further we will progress together as a country, a state, and a county in the next 100 years. Thank you to everyone here today, the members of the League of Women Voters, the Piedmont Triad chapter, the North Carolina chapter, and the United States chapter, and all of those who have worked so hard on this dedication from the very beginning. It's something we can all be proud of and will stand as a reminder to continue to share the legacy of the League with those who come behind us. And I'm especially grateful today for you allowing me to be a part of this historic moment. So at this time, I'd like to recognize elected officials in the room who happen to be all women. And we're able to serve because of the efforts of Gertrude Weil and others who champion the causes for women's rights to vote. We have with us U.S. Congresswoman Kathy Manning, if you would just stand. From Greensboro City Council, Tammy Thurm. Mary Kay Abuja-Wada. And Nancy Hoffman. And our very own Commissioner at Large, Kay Cashin. Thank all of you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Calvina. It's now my pleasure to introduce Carol Hart. Carol is the director of the Greensboro History Museum, and she's going to speak this morning about Gertrude as an activist and leader.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this group today. It's wonderful to see so many, mostly women out there that I know looking so wonderful in your hats and outfits. At the History Museum, of course, we're all about the past, remembering the past, putting it in context, discovering new things, and making meaning. And those meanings change. The history changes, the past changes with what questions we ask, what things we focus on. It's a whole nother lecture to talk about monuments and markers, but I think we're all aware that it's something that we've been thinking about very deeply. Why a marker goes up and why a marker comes down, and what it's remembering, what it represents, and how it may express the values of our society today. So I'm really, again, excited to be here, especially because at the Greensboro History Museum, we currently have an exhibition brought to you through the public-private partnership of the City of Greensboro. We're in the library department, and our nonprofit, GHM Inc., entitled North Carolina Democracy, 11 Elections, one of which is the election of November 2nd, 1920. You know, that election when women were for the very first time allowed to vote and run for office and elected in North Carolina. We tell that story of what led up to that election day. On one wall, we have enlarged to almost life-size a photograph of Gertrude Weil at work at a desk in the office of the Equal Suffrage League of North Carolina at 116 Fayetteville Road, Raleigh, North Carolina. And as it turns out, that image is in your commemorative brochure there, which is nice. She's sitting at the desk looking right at the photographer, at you if you're in the museum, with a small smile on her face, turned away from a desk that is loaded with envelopes and folded letters and partially typed letter in her typewriter and a large map of North Carolina. She's alongside two colleagues, a little dog, and a boy as well. It's a reminder to me that she created a team, and there was much more than the marching and the speeches that sometimes the popular notion of a suffragette goes out there. There was hard office work and communicating and lobbying using all the means possible at the times. Imagine what you would have given for a photocopier, maybe ability to text message, email blast. Gertrude Weil was a citizen activist, a courageous advocate for reform and social justice, and leader in the women's suffrage movement. As she grew older, she became more and more liberal and referred to herself as a socialist and at times a radical. And I think I read a quote, she said, "If I live much longer, I may end up a communist," but that didn't happen. She was committed to her family, her community, and her Jewish religion. Gertrude is quoted as saying she wouldn't rest until North Carolina had ratified the amendment guaranteeing women the right to vote. And she died just 26 days after the 19th Amendment was symbolically ratified in her home state, North Carolina General Assembly, at 91 years old on May 30th, 1971. While North Carolina's 50-year failure was a source of ongoing aggravation, I'm sure, as a young woman, she saw what can happen with persistence, hard work, and the dream for women's rights. And she did celebrate the more meaningful ratification of the 19th Amendment by US Congress on August 18, 1920. Born in Goldsboro, North Carolina in December 1879 to a prominent, wealthy Jewish family, imagine what she experienced during those 91 years. The Civil War had only very recently ended. She lived through World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, and even the Vietnam War. Think of the changes in technology during that time. For the first years of her life, there were no cars. There was no telephone, no airplanes, and yet Gertrude lived to see a man walk on the moon. It's just quite remarkable to see what happened during her lifetime. While these changes are mind-boggling, I note that social change progressed much more slowly. Remember what the status of women was in this country and the domestic roles that defined most women's lives in the late and early 1900s, and actually through the 1900s. It took an extraordinary family to give Gertrude the opportunity as a young girl of 15 to further her education by traveling north to study at the Horace Mann High School at Columbia University in New York City. And it took an extraordinarily intelligent and adventurous young woman to continue her education as the first North Carolinian at Smith College in Massachusetts. After graduating, Gertrude came back to Goldsboro, to her home. While she loved to travel and made many friends, she was constrained by family expectations and was based in her hometown the rest of her life. She never married, putting all her energies into a life advocating progressive causes and using her organizational skills and strength to make a difference in North Carolina. Gertrude's family, her Jewish community, and the women she was exposed to at Smith strongly impacted her approach to leadership. Her mother, Mina, and aunts' philanthropic and social service activities, as well as her father and uncle's active civic and political work, taught Gertrude her civic responsibility was to do good things within her community, and that those activities could have a profound, wider impact. Back home once again, like many of the Weil women, Gertrude was active in civics and social improvement and joined a number of voluntary associations like the Council of Jewish Women. She started chairing committees. Within 6 years, Gertrude was leading the Goldsboro Women's Club, founded by her mother, Mina, in 1899. Often using charitable, civic, and traditional women's organizations to accomplish larger social goals, she recognized that the power to change the world rested in the day-to-day activities of organized groups at a local level. Gertrude led by doing, strategically gathering coalitions as she worked. Gertrude's role in the suffrage movement and the League of Women Voters will be discussed in just 4 minutes if I don't talk too much. Okay. But suffice it to say, she was in the thick of things. After World War I and the 19th Amendment, Gertrude focused her efforts on fighting for improving working conditions in North Carolina textile mills, child labor laws, and other labor reform. She pushed for educational opportunities for all. For many years, Gertrude helped families through the Goldsboro Bureau of Social Service. And as its president in 1927, she inspired the Bureau to, quote, look beyond the immediate problem of the special case to the underlying physical and social conditions. Other examples of Gertrude's activities include her leading North Carolina women's strong support of unionization and the 1929 strike at textile mills led by female workers in protest of unionization and poor working conditions. In 1930, she was a leading member in a group who issued a manifesto to support collective bargaining and free speech. During the Depression, in 1933, Gertrude was appointed a director of federal public relief work with the duty to administer local New Deal relief efforts. In the second part of her life, Gertrude's dedication to social justice led her to challenge racial segregation and disenfranchisement. She expanded her civil rights work in the 1930s, joining the Southern Women for Prevention of Lynching. In 1932, Gertrude was appointed by Governor Gardner to the North Carolina Commission on Interracial Cooperation. The commission included both Black and white leaders and aimed for better communication and trust between the two communities. She worked on the commission for almost 25 years. The commission exposed Gertrude to the racial equity issues that impacted communities, and she advocated legal, economic, educational equality for African Americans. Through the 30s and 40s, Gertrude and her mother devoted themselves also to rescuing Jewish refugees from persecution in Europe. She presided over the North Carolina Association of Jewish Women, sat on the board of the North Carolina Home for the Jewish Aged, and helped to raise money for Jewish charities. In the 1960s, Gertrude expressed her dedication to social justice and welfare by supporting integration of schools and other facilities. By this time, remember, Gertrude was in her 80s, and in 1963, she convened a biracial council in her home, the home in which she was born and died. Gertrude explored traditional women's domains, home and family, volunteer organizations, religious, educational, and local community service, and showed how leadership in those areas could impact the more traditional male-dominated political domains of power. Although she never held elective office, Gertrude Weil had a stronger impact on her community than many elected officials. I end with Gertrude's own words, written in the late 1960s as part of an essay entitled "What Judaism Means to Me." It gives insight into the woman who focused on living a righteous life out loud and did so much for the women of North Carolina. Quote, "In my definition, religion includes the whole of life, one's beliefs, one's attitudes to society, one's behavior. One's religious duty included and includes the whole range of life and its activities. There is a tendency to divide life into compartments and impose different codes of morals in our various relationships. There is a business code, a political code, a family code, a religious code, etc. I am against all departmentalization. Life is one and whole. My religion demands the same honesty, fairness, and reliability in all one's relations."
Our next speaker will focus on one particular part of Gertrude's life. That would be her role in the suffrage movement. Kathleen McCarty Smith is the interim head of the Martha Blakeney Hodges Special Collections and University Archives at UNCG's Jackson Library.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm so very excited and honored to be here today to speak a little bit about Gertrude Weil and her fight for women's suffrage. She once said, "It is so obvious that to treat people equally is the right thing to do." Such a simple and obvious idea, and one that would come to define Gertrude Weil's life. Advocacy came naturally to Gertrude. Her sense of social justice and compassion made her a champion for progressive movements such as women's suffrage. This was not always a popular cause. not in North Carolina, and not in the South. Even though the women of our state fought hard for the ratification of the 19th Amendment, or as it was sometimes called, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. When Gertrude formed the North Carolina Equal Suffrage Association in November of 1913, it had been 68 years since suffragists such as Lucretia Mott and Katie Stanton first raised the call to arms for women's voting rights at the Seneca Falls Convention in New York. And these had not been easy years. Since the convention, women had been put off, pacified, and denied serious consideration of the vote. Gertrude worked to expand the Equal Suffrage Association, becoming the president in 1919 and 1920. She collected signatures on petitions, gained endorsements from legislatures and prominent men in the state, and furthered connection with national affiliates, such as the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She had been a member of the National Association since 1911. In fact, she knew Carrie Chapman Catt, who she considered a personal mentor and who kept her apprised of national happenings at the suffrage front. As Carol mentioned, during this time, Gertrude also became president of the Goldsboro Equal Suffrage League and continued advocating for the vote and building a network of supporters, especially through women's clubs and women's colleges. The blossoming of suffrage leagues all over North Carolina galvanized supporters of the vote, and the push for ratification continued to grow stronger. Yet with war looming, women were called to pivot their energies to home front mobilization, temporarily stagnating the suffrage cause. It was quickly put to, they led the women, if there was ever a question of whether women could contribute to the war effort, it was quickly put to rest. They led the second line of defense during the Great War, taking many jobs previously done by men, including farming, industry, and mining, just to name a few. Their efforts at food production and conservation ensured adequate supplies for our troops and war-torn Europe. Gertrude volunteered with the Red Cross and became involved in instruction, recruiting, and membership. She also served as the state chair of the Department for the Maintenance of Existing Social Service Agencies and the county chair for the World Relief Committee. As women proved the importance and effectiveness of their war work efforts, attitudes toward their roles in citizenship dramatically shifted, resulting in the rise of what was termed as the new woman and the resurgence of the suffrage movement on a state and national levels. Encouraged by the attention and respect resulting from home front mobilization, but frustrated at the pace of progress, North Carolina suffragists made a final push for voting rights, and Gertrude Weil was there leading the charge. In June 1919, the Federal Women's Suffrage Amendment was submitted to the states for ratification, and by April 20th, 35 of the necessary 36 states had passed it. It soon became apparent, as Gertrude wrote to fellow suffragists, that the eyes of the country are now all turned toward North Carolina. She asked supporters to put their shoulders to the wheel and make one strong final effort. Her battle cry was, think ratification, talk ratification, work for ratification. But despite the hard work accomplished by Gertrude and the women of North Carolina, when the state legislature met on the 10th of August, 1920, they did not ratify the amendment, allowing Tennessee to cast the deciding vote. Of course, regardless of the objections of the state's legislature, women officially gained the right to vote in the United States with 36 votes saying yes. When Gertrude heard that North Carolina did not vote for the amendment, she said, "As you know, our fight for ratification by the North Carolina legislature is over. We were unsuccessful in our efforts. Our North Carolina men have refused to ratify. And victory will not truly be ours until North Carolina ratifies." In closing, she called upon women to hold together whatever local organizations you have. We shall need it to carry out the work that lies before us. And there was still quite a bit of work to be done. This was especially true for African American women who had been overlooked and disenfranchised in the suffrage movement. Even though the passage of the 19th Amendment prevented states from denying women the vote, women of color still faced discrimination in the form of Jim Crow laws. These included restrictions such as poll taxes, literary tests, and overly complicated registration policies, as well as intimidation tactics. There were also challenges in gaining additional rights for women and social reform. As president of the Equal Suffrage Association, Gertrude called for a meeting in Greensboro at the recently constructed Guilford County Courthouse, where we stand today. Over 100 women attended that meeting, representing counties throughout North Carolina. Many women who had fought for their rights across the state were members of the committee or the advisory board. Now that the amendment was passed, women knew they must strategize on how they should prepare for the vote and influence state and national legislation. Attending the meeting was her friend and colleague, Harriet Elliott, a professor of political science at the North Carolina College for Women, now UNCG. As an educator, she sought to explore the idea of progressive educational and legislative initiatives, establishing a plan to teach women, including her young students, about the history of the country and the importance of citizenship and responsible voting. By the time the meeting was finished, the North Carolina League of Women Voters was born, following the founding of the National League in 1920, which, according to Carrie Chapman Catt, was formed to finish the fight and work for needed legislation. The group's constitution made it clear that it would be a nonpartisan organization, urging all women to consider that a right to vote was a solemn duty. Gertrude Weil was unanimously elected as president of the organization, and along with a very strong board, including Laura Cohn and Helen Brooks, she continued to make huge strides in leading the women of North Carolina in exercising their newly won rights and promoting social causes. In order to make a further impact, she became the leader in the Legislative Council of North Carolina. Gertrude Weil lived way into her 80s, witnessing the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, bringing the promise of suffrage closer to a reality for the people of color whose votes had been so cruelly suppressed. And finally, after over 50 years of waiting, she lived to see the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1971 by her home state of North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Kay Cashin, our next speaker, serves as Commissioner at Large for the Guilford County Board of Commissioners. She has extensive knowledge of the history of this courthouse and will talk today about the historical significance of what happened here in this courthouse on that October day many, many years back.
Okay.
Thank you, President Schiffler. Good morning, Congresswoman and others. Thank you. Speaking of historic, we've been at this better than 4 years, so I feel like this is a day of celebration. In fact, on the way over here this morning, I kept thinking, you know, we really ought to have Worley give us some cool in the game music, celebration music, so we could get up and dance. This is quite an occasion here today. I'm Kay Cashin, Commissioner at Large in Guilford County. So if you live in Guilford County, I am yours. Call me. Everybody else does. So 100 years ago today, Gertrude Will opened her second meeting of the year here in Greensboro. The first was in January at the newly opened O. Henry Hotel, just a couple of blocks away from here. And she opened that for the annual meeting of the Equal Suffrage Association of North Carolina, at which time some 5,000 attended. 5,000. What an amazing number when we think about that. But they were intentional about their cause, passage of the 19th Amendment and its ratification. The second meeting was to close out the suffrage organization and organize the League of Women Voters of North Carolina, with some 100 representatives attending, women from across North Carolina, from all the small hamlets to the larger towns. And it was held right here in this very room, this newly opened courthouse nicknamed the Temple of Justice. As many of you know, Greensboro is located in the center of the state, and it was bustling with urban activity, railroads, cars, and the new 17-story skyscraper in the backdrop just across the street, the Jefferson Standard Building. Greensboro was the hub of manufacturing and distribution for national and foreign markets. Greensboro, the Gate City, birthplace of Dolly Madison and O. Henry. Andrew Jackson practiced law here, later becoming a U.S. president. Greensboro was the leading city of the New South and known for being progressive. This community was not one to be ignored. It had advanced manufacturing, such as Cone Mills, Burlington Industries, North Carolina Steel and Iron Manufacturing. It had the tobacco industry and Vicks Chemical Company, where Vicks Vapor Rub was invented. It was also a community that valued education, public schools, and colleges. It valued and prioritized the arts, libraries, and public health. Greensboro architect Harry Barton designed the Guilford County Courthouse we're in today, which was considered to be the most handsome in North Carolina. It was designed in a Renaissance neoclassical revival style and was designed to be a symbol of strength and solidarity. Made of Mount Airy granite and terracotta, it has stood the test of time and has lasted 102 years. The first and third floors housed all the county's administrative, the sheriff's office, and all the county departments. A steep, narrow, and winding staircase back behind these rooms brought prisoners down to trial from the jail, which was on the fourth floor. The jailer and his family also lived on the fourth floor, just across the hall from the jail. Here on the second floor was the courtroom, the only courtroom in Guilford County. On October 7th, 1920, there was no court held that day, letting us know that the local suffrage leaders were obviously very influential to be granted the use of the whole second floor for a whole day and evening. So let's pretend for just a moment, if you will. Close your eyes for just a moment. Just close your eyes for just a moment. If you will just think about it. You are seated where your League of Women Voters forebears sat. Think about that. You're seated right there in the same seat. What thoughts ran through their mind? The importance of the day? Will the proposed new organization work? And how do I talk about all of this back home with my family and friends? Now, open your eyes and look around at this beautiful room. You are seeing exactly what they saw that day. The beautiful woodwork with the fluted pilasters topped with plaster Corinthian capitals, an extraordinary coffered ceiling, and elegant lighting, still the same as when they saw it that day when they were here. This historic meeting also hosted two very important national leaders. Carrie Chapman Catt, the last president of the National American Women Suffrage Association, came from New York, and Maud Wood Park, the first president of the U.S. League of Women Voters, from Boston, but she came to Greensboro directly from Columbus, Ohio that day, where she had been on a conference with the Democratic presidential candidate, Governor James Cox, the day before. He reportedly was in favor of the majority of the League's proposed legislative agenda. She had previously visited with Republican presidential candidate Senator Harding to discuss the agenda, building relationships before needing them. Ms. Weil used the first hour of the meeting here to close out the records of the North Carolina Equal Suffrage Association and had them sent to the North Carolina archives. Then the gavel occurred for a meeting to create a North Carolina League of Women Voters, an organization that would register voters, especially newly franchised women voters, educate them on the issues, and advocate, especially for progressive ones such as child labor laws, women's voting rights, political fairness, and equity. There would be no partisan ties binding the organization. A constitution had to be written and a nominating committee established. Local women identified as being involved in this process are Harriet Elliott, professor of political science from the North Carolina State Normal and Industrial College, later becoming the Women's College of the University of North Carolina, now known as UNCG. She gained prominence at the national level for her leadership on numerous war-related commissions. Remember, we just passed the war ending. Later, Miss Elliott was named a U.S. delegate to UNESCO in London in 1945. We know at least two of the Cone women. Laura, wife of Julius Cone, and Emily, wife of Bernard Cone, were in attendance. Laura Cone, with whom Miss Will had stayed the night before, became the first treasurer of the North Carolina League of Women Voters and served the league for over 10 years. Mrs. Bertha Sternberger was appointed to the nominating committee and supported the league in numerous ways, especially financially, until the time of her death. And there was Helen Brooks, the wife of attorney Aubrey Brooks, still one of Greensboro's prestigious law firms. Mrs. Brooks was elected third vice president of the newly formed North Carolina League of Women Voters. Although not from Greensboro per se, Sally Southall Cotton, a graduate of the Greensboro Female College, now known as Greensboro College, was also in attendance. Mrs. Cotton was one of the founders of the North Carolina Federation of Women's Clubs in 1902 and was yet another woman of national prominence. In 1893, she was appointed by North Carolina Governor Carr to serve as one of the state's managers at the Chicago World Columbian Exposition. She was one of the organizers of the National Congress of Mothers, later to become the PTA. Other local women were present on that day, but unfortunately the records do not tell us all the list. In addition to the day-long meeting, Mrs. Maud Wood Park gave an address that evening at 8 o'clock, right here in this room, that was open to the public. The Greensboro Daily News reported, and I quote, "Last night to an audience of both men and women that all but filled the main courtroom of the new County Temple of Justice, Mrs. Park, chairwoman of the National League of Women Voters, delivered a most enlightening address in which she very clearly outlined the aims and purposes of the newly formed League of Women Voters." As Sally Southall Cotton, in her book, The History of North Carolina Federation of Women's Clubs in 1901 to 1925, wrote in the opening line, and I quote, "What was known as the women's movement was a revolution, bloodless but not purposeless." This is what Gertrude Will and over 100 women achieved right here 102 years ago. Today, we are honored to accept the monument and the National Historical Marker highlighting the founding of the League of Women Voters of North Carolina, the trail, and the accomplishments of Gertrude Will and her extraordinary leadership to promote the right to vote, the right to be informed, and the basis of what this nation was founded on, democracy. Here at the Guilford County Courthouse and Government Building, a place where everyone should have a voice, they will stand as reminders. But let us remember, the work is not yet finished. If they meet here in 3020, what will they say about this century's work? Think about it. So, welcome home, Leaguers, and as you leave today, be re-spirited in the mission and the cause, knowing that if democracy is to survive, it will be cause of an informed electorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. This morning you have heard Carol talk to you about Gertrude's life and how she became involved in activism. You've heard Kathleen speak about her role in the suffrage movement and the establishment of the League of Women Voters. You've heard Kay talk about this building and what happened that day many years ago, and also about the involvement of local women here from Greensboro. At this point, I'd like to spend a few minutes tying this together and showing you the legacy that Gertrude Weil has left behind. Like Carrie Chapman Catt and other prominent suffragists, Gertrude understood that passing the 19th Amendment and getting the vote for women was not an end in itself, but rather it was a means to an end. That end being, at least in Gertrude's eyes, a more humane society for us to live in and a better world. In her own words, Gertrude outlined her vision for what it meant to women to have that vote. And I quote, "Here is my message to you today, and I wish it might be carried to every woman in the whole state. You women who have all these years been working for clean streets, sanitary markets, and beautiful parks, for better babies and healthy children, for the protection of the working woman, for the good schoolhouses and well-paid teachers, for public libraries and free baths. Continue that work for these things with unabated enthusiasm and all the facilities that you command." Then she goes on to say, "The privilege of the ballot means the invariable responsibility to use it conscientiously. I beg you to learn something of your government, its constitution, its election laws. Inform yourselves as to the candidates running for office, from the presidency to the most insignificant city official. Our government places the responsibility for good government upon every responsible citizen." The North Carolina League, founded 102 years ago today, right here in this building, was to be the vehicle through which these newly enfranchised women would become knowledgeable about the voting process and assume a larger role in public affairs. Between October 7th, 1920, and November 2nd, 1920, when the first election that women could vote in was held, 120,000 women were registered in this state. Is that not unbelievable? And most of it was done through the League of Women Voters. The North Carolina League, at its inception, followed the model of the National League and was a nonpartisan organization pursuing a threefold program. First, you had to interest women in wanting to vote, especially in the South. Women in the South were not too excited about this. And then you had to get them registered. You had to educate women in the ideals and the processes of government. And then you needed to invite them to study the social conditions and to learn how to propose a legislation that would be progressive and bring about change. Gertrude worked hard to build the League's capacity. And she knew that in this state, many of the women were members of the North Carolina Federation of Women's Clubs. So that had been her springboard for activism. That's where her work started. And she enlisted the members of those clubs to help the League in their work. Now, I wonder if Gertrude had any idea of the legacy she was leaving behind for us. When she stood in this courtroom, dissolved the North Carolina National American Women's Suffrage Association and founded the North Carolina League of Women Voters. That legacy has certainly stood the test of time and has actually brought us to this courthouse this morning. Let's fast forward to today, October 7th, 2022, and let's see what the same League of Women Voters looks like now. We're still a nonpartisan organization, and we're still made up of volunteers. It's a little different, though, because you know now men can join us. We work to promote informed and active participation in government and to influence public policy. Those are our two things that we do. And we do this through education and advocacy. Of course, the league I know best is League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad, but I could tell you that who we are and what we do is pretty much the same for all the local leagues in this state. So what do we look like now? Well, on any given day, you might see our voter registration chair, Barbara Carter, setting up tables. Might be at the Saturday market a few blocks west of here on Market Street. She has voter registration forms, she has information about the league, she has information about upcoming elections. She might be at an apartment complex because the manager has called and told her he'd like to do a voter registration drive at the complex. Or maybe she's at the Pride Parade, or maybe she's at the new citizen ceremony, registering the people who have just become citizens and now are able to vote. Or maybe she's just handing out nonpartisan information about upcoming elections and the voting process in general. Or maybe you see our voter services chairperson, Donna Peterson. She is contacting candidates to participate in an upcoming forum. Or maybe it is our fair elections chair, Andy Stern, working with his roundtable to learn about the national popular vote and how it be able to help ensure that every vote cast is really heard. Or maybe it's Tricia DeBeer and Mary Nell Smith, our criminal justice roundtable co-chairs. They're sitting in court watching cases being heard by the various judges and watching the bail requirements that those judges are setting. Because that roundtable is studying the inequities in our current bail bond system. But no matter what league you're watching or what city you're in, we are still carrying out the same work. The words may be a little different now, and our activities and issues may have changed some, but we are still empowering voters through voter registration and educating them on the voting process, and defending our democracy by studying issues, taking positions on those issues, and advocating for those positions. Look at our banner over there. That captures exactly who we are and what we do. Now, Gertrude's legacy has made it 102 years, and I am hoping that it's going to continue for many, many years to come. Before we end this morning, there are family members of Gertrude's in the audience that I would like to recognize. Would you please stand when I call your names. David Weil. David, would you please stand? He is a great nephew of Gertrude. Next, we have Tony Bleethenthal and his wife Betsy. Tony is also a great nephew of Gertrude. Just a minute ago, you heard Kay mention some of the local women who were involved in the same work that Gertrude was doing. And I ran across a letter not long ago. Gertrude was talking about one of her very closest friends, Laura Cohn. And Laura's great, I'm not certain, is it nephew or he has stepped out for a minute. It's Tom Cohn, but Renee is here, his wife, and he is here representing Laura Cohn. Now, I'm certain that you all realize that we can't hold an event such as this without having several thank yous. I just realized I forgot something that I meant to do. We have local leagues represented from throughout the state this morning, and I'd like the members of those leagues to stand, please. Now, as I was saying, I know you realize that an event like this involves quite a bit of work, and I have thank yous that I would like to give at this point. First of all, to Kay Cashin. I want to thank you, Kay, for working with the Board of Commissioners, first of all, to secure permission for us to install a marker and a monument on county property. Secondly, for making the arrangements for us to be in this room this morning, exactly where all the events took place 102 years ago. And you will hear later, when we do the dedications, some of the other things that Kay has done to help us. I also want to thank the County Board of Commissioners for their role in making this event possible here in this building. I want to thank Robin Keller and her staff, who really made it so much easier for us by handling so many of the details that went into the program this morning. I want to thank Willie Taylor. Willie, would you stand? Is that okay? Would you mind doing that? Stand. I need to tell you all that without Willie, we wouldn't have a program today. Back in December 2018, Willie brought word to LWVPT, the Board of Directors, that the State League was planning to celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment, and that every local league in the state was being asked to form a committee to celebrate the milestone. Out of that was born what we called Project 2020, and Project 2020 is what brought this program to fruition. Willie's original concept was a community-wide celebration. She involved people from organizations all over the city and the county. But in March 2020, just as we were getting started, COVID shut us down. So we had to pick up later, and for most of 2019, Willie had educated us well about what was involved with the suffrage movement and the establishment of the League. But by March 2020, we shut down. I want to recognize Catherine Maggott. Would you stand, please, Catherine? If any of you know Catherine, you know she's a powerhouse when it comes to getting things done. And Catherine joined the original Project 2020 committee and dug right in with her usual enthusiasm. She proposed the idea of a solar-powered rose garden that could move from place to place in the city, and people would see this rose garden and wonder what this was about and ask questions. And of course, the yellow rose was a symbol of the people who supported the passage of the 19th Amendment. And so we had yellow roses all over the city for about, 4 weeks, Catherine? And then COVID shut us down. That was the end of that. Catherine also started off with discovering a website that talked about a national, I get this mixed up because all of these long titles are really hard for me to keep in this old head of mine, I'm afraid. National Votes for Women's Trail, and this led to the Pomeroy marker that is outside. And lastly, this program brochure that you all have been using this morning, this was Catherine's inspiration. She designed it, she located, this is actually a quilt, but this is a painting of the quilt. She located this, and you have a brief history of Gertrude to take with you. She worked with David McLean at King's English to make this a reality. I want to thank Joe Nicholas for providing financial support from the State League, and I'd also like to thank her for the moral support she gave our committee when we came back from COVID and picked up the pieces and started working again. I'd like to thank Jean Tannenbaum and the Tannenbaum Sternberger Foundation for providing the funding for the monument that you'll see unveiled shortly. And I'd also like to thank Barbara Lau. Barbara, are you here? Would you please stand? Thank you. I'd like to thank Barbara Lau and Barbara Irvine. Barbara Irvine was unable to be here at the very last minute. She had a medical situation yesterday and could not be here. They are with the Pomeroy Foundation and the National Collective of Women's History Sites, and they had a role in bringing the National Votes for Women Trail marker to Greensboro. And lastly, I would like to thank Tracy Nash. Tracy, would you stand, please? When we came out of COVID, we realized that the project that we had to put together was really big, and Tracy was asked by the board, the LWVPT board, to take over coordinating the monument that Willie was working with, the marker that Catherine was working with, and to kind of put all of these pieces that needed to come together for today to happen, to put those pieces in place. We started with a committee that was 20, 25 people around the table back in 2019. But when we came back together at the end of 2021, there were only 8 of us who were working. And I would like to name those 8 people today because over the past 10 months, they've done quite a bit of work. Kay Brandon, okay? Mary Miller, Ann Shaw, Vicki White Lawrence, Tracy Nash, Willie Taylor, and myself. First up is Catherine Maggot, who is going to tell us how the marker, sitting over there with the purple cover and the yellow ribbon, how that came to be. Catherine?
First, I'd like to educate you a little bit and talk about the 2 fabulous organizations that created this. The National Collaborative of Women's History Sites, and I'm sorry, Barbara Irvine, who is one of the founders, could not be here today. Also one of the founders of the Alice Paul Institute. They came together and decided to create, for the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage and the ratification of the 19th Amendment, an online virtual trail to be known as the National Votes for Women Trail. This online virtual trail would be of great importance to the history of women's suffrage movement. Never before in its history, and for the first time ever, they would gather the story of women's suffrage all in one place, documenting the 72 years of the movement and the countless participants historic in its creation. The William G. Pomeroy Foundation heard about this and was so impressed with the online virtual trail that they generously offered to provide a grant to elect physical trail of historic women's suffrage markers, 250 in total in all 50 states, commemorating the suffrage movement and highlighting its importance. This physical trail of historic suffrage markers would bring alive for viewers the little-known history of women's suffrage and its significance that expanded democracy in the United States. Each historic marker recognizes the historically significant people, place, or things instrumental to women in gaining the right to vote. So now for the story. So I was surfing on the internet looking for sites about the women's suffrage commemorative in April of 2019, 3.5 years ago, and found the National Votes for Women Trail, and it mentioned Gertrude Weil. So I got very excited and emailed them and said, how do we pursue adding Gertrude Weil, the founder of the North Carolina League of Women Voters, to the National Votes for Women Trail online? Barbara Lau, who is sitting right here with the long hair, a board member and the executive director of the Pauli Murray Center for History and Social Justice, said, "Your timing is outstanding." In addition to listing these important places and events on the online map, the National Collaborative is also partnering with the Pomeroy Foundation to create actual physical markers that can be put a part of the commemoration. Gertrude's work is on our radar as one we can nominate for the marker. We'd love to work with you on this process. My state co-chair, Barbara Irvine, and I will talk to you tomorrow, and then we will get back to you to set up a time to talk. So the next day, I get an email from Barbara Irvine, the founder of the Alice Paul Institute. You can imagine I was really excited. And she said, we'll be picking 3 women to represent the state of North Carolina, and Gertrude will be one of them. I immediately called Willie Taylor, the chair of the Project 2020 committee, and told her everything, and she said, let's do it. So I wrote them back to please send an application, and we agreed to have a conference call together in my house. And Willie came for support and to add important input. And these 2 fabulous women led us through this process. So 6 months later, a 25-page application, historic in nature, was submitted in December of 2019, and we heard back in 2020, April. After 2 historians looked at it, and we went through 6 different versions, because on a marker, every word is important and counts. And then we were selected as the only women's suffrage historical marker approved for the state of North Carolina in 2020. Yes. So since then, we have assisted 2 other markers, actually 3 now, to occur, one at Charlotte Hawkins Brown and one in Asheville that I was able to go see. And so we are here today. And I'd love to have Barbara come up as the representative from the National Collaborative to read the letter that we received from them.
It's great to be here with all of you, and I bring greetings to you from the Board of Directors of the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites. We are a multifaceted organization of people who work in government, nonprofit, in education, in all aspects of trying to promote ways to commemorate and support and forward women's history through historic locations. So, on behalf of the board, congratulations on the dedication of the National Votes for Women Trail marker honoring Gertrude Weil and her work for women's suffrage. A project of the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites, the trail links places that tell the rich story of the long struggle for women's voting rights in America. One thing that's a little different about the trail and the markers worked prior to the passage of the 19th Amendment, but the trail also includes people who continue to this day to support and try to advance women's voting rights. The fight for the vote is woven throughout our history. The National Votes for Women's Trail highlights how the women's suffrage movement took hold in cities, towns, and rural areas of America. Women, and as we've heard, some men, from myriad backgrounds and cultures, ordinary as well as leading figures, dedicated years of their lives to the cause of votes for women. They faced fierce opposition both in the popular culture and, as we've heard about our own state, in the state legislatures. But ultimately, they succeeded when the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified August 26, 1920. A century later, scores of dedicated community historians have created the National Votes for Women Trail to document the suffragists' victories and defeats along the path to the 19th Amendment. Like their suffragist foremothers, they are volunteers, and they are passionate about uncovering untold stories that give us a rich and fuller view of our past. The National Collaborative has partnered with the William G. Pomeroy Foundation to make the trail a physical reality with over 250 roadside markers, as you heard, in all 50 states in the United States. But the virtual trail, the online site, has more than 2,400 sites and can be found online at nvwt.org. Our goal is that the story of women's suffrage gives all Americans a renewed dedication to American democracy and its promise of full equality for all. So congratulations on the dedication of the marker, and a heartfelt thanks to all who contributed to making it possible. Thank you so much.
We also received a lovely letter from the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. Congratulations from all of us at the William G. Pomeroy Foundation on the celebration of your National Votes for Women's Trail historic marker. We send our greetings from Syracuse, New York, as you commemorate the inspiring legacy of women's suffrage leader Gertrude Weil. From the Pomeroy Foundation, one of our main initiatives is to help people celebrate their community's history. Since 2006, when my father, Bill Pomeroy, established the Foundation's first marker program, we have awarded nearly 2,000 grants for roadside markers and plaques nationwide. We feel strongly that markers help educate the public, encourage pride of place, and promote historic tourism. With this National Votes for Women's Trail marker, you recognize the important contributions made by Gertrude Weil to advanced women's suffrage. Now the Greensboro community is part of a select group of locations from across the United States who are able to tell their women's suffrage history with a Pomeroy Foundation-funded roadside marker. The markers are well-researched with primary sources reviewed by professional historians. That is what sets our markers apart as a gold standard of historic markers. The Pomeroy Foundation is proud to do its part in commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment by funding 250 of these wonderful National Votes for Women's trail markers across the country. We commend your effort to celebrate women's suffrage history and send our appreciation to the League of Women Voters of the North Carolina, the League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad, the Tannenbaum Sternberger Foundation, Guilford County, the City of Greensboro, our National Votes for Women Trail partner, the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites, as well as all of those who have been involved in obtaining the marker unveiled today. The Pomeroy Foundation is proud to help you preserve and commemorate your community's history. We know this historic marker for Gertrude Weil will ensure the pioneering women's suffrage history in North Carolina and our nation will be celebrated for generations to come. From all of our dedicated staff and trustees at the Pomeroy Foundation, congratulations, dear and Pomeroy. So I'd just like to end by saying that these women, in one act, which took them 72 years, they added 50% of the population, women, to be full citizens, having direct impact by the action of voting. This marker will forever honor their work. It will serve as a reminder of women standing up for what is right, regardless of what others say. And we will do that directly after we hear from Willie Taylor, who will be speaking about the monument, and we will go over first to the marker and unveil that, and then the monument.
As I was sitting there, I was thinking, if I had two wishes, the first one would be that the over 100 women who were here 102 years ago could see this beautiful, beautiful Guilford County Courthouse grounds. Thank you, Guilford County staff, for doing all this work. And my second wish, and I think that this represents what Gertrude Weil would be most proud of, is that we have among us today the first woman of color president of the U.S. League, who was elected in 1998 and served until 2002. 74 years after the founding of the League of Women Voters, 78, which meant it was 6 years after the founding of the U.S. League. She will be speaking at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and the title of her presentation will be Show Up, Stand Up, Speak Up. This is your time. Dr. Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins, the beautiful woman standing over there, has written several books, one of which is on sale now at the Scuppernong bookstore, and it is the untold story of the women of color in the League of Women Voters. It is a must read. The book will be on sale this afternoon following her presentation, and she will be there to sign it. So now, on with the comments about the monument. Gertrude Weil, suffragist, humanitarian, social activist, philanthropist, and founder of the North Carolina League of Voters. What an honor to stand here today at the very site where she assembled over 100 women from across the state and nation to establish an organization to help in registering women to vote and educating them on the issues following the ratification of the 19th Amendment. The highest award given by the League of Women Voters in North Carolina at their biennial convention is the Gertrude Weil Award. We knew she founded the League October 7, 1912, and was the first chairman of the board. But until Dr. Leonard Rogoff's biography of her was released in 2018, we did not know that it occurred right here at the Guilford County Courthouse. Work was needed to fill in the details. Was it just an announcement on the steps of the courthouse, as had been suggested, and who attended? A small committee of the State League was formed in 2017 to plan for the 100th commemoration of the 19th Amendment's ratification and the founding of the League of Women Voters. The committee was advised that a state marker would likely be all we could get accomplished, but they didn't know the Guilford County Commissioners, especially Commissioner Kay Cashin. When Commissioner Cashin was approached by a member of the committee about a state marker, her response was, "We're doing a monument, and it will go in the monument garden here at the courthouse." It was this day in April 2018 that the wheels were put in motion. Who would do the monument? What would be inscribed on it? And most of all, who would pay for it? Scary. North State Monument came with a high recommendation, and thanks to the staff at the Greensboro Public Library and History Museum, who shared archived articles from the High Point Enterprise, the Winston-Salem Journal, but most helpful were the ones from the Greensboro Daily News. The Daily News ran an article on October 7th, 1920, announcing the meeting, and an extensive article on October 8th covering the meeting, including the names of many local women in attendance. By this time, we had a full understanding of the magnitude and historic significance of what Gertrude Weil and over 100 additional women had achieved. With that information, we approached the Sternberger Tannenbaum Foundation, Inc., to ask for funding. Thanks to Jean Tannenbaum, chair of the board at the time, she listened and understood the significance and led the effort to make it happen. Thanks to on behalf of the League, I would like to thank Jean, the entire board of directors of the Tannenbaum Sternberger Foundation, and the executive director, Bob Klepfer, who is here as well, for funding this monument. A reminder that Vote for Women was not a gift, that the Vote for Women was not a gift, but a 72-year struggle, and then all women were not enfranchised. We must never give up. We don't know all the local women present on October 7th, but we know some of them who were here. Harriet Elliott of Women's College, now UNCG, Laura Cohn, Helen Brooks, Bertha Sternberger, Elaine Cohn, Sally Southall Cutton, and others whose names were not included in the records. We are so grateful to these courageous, determined women, for it is on their shoulders we stand today. Members of a few of the families are here, and we thank you for coming and continuing to carry the torch for justice and equality.